Thank you for being here. My name is Aris Emmanouloudis. I am a guest researcher at the University of Amsterdam, where I also obtained my PhD at. And today I'm very excited because I get to talk to you about some topics that I'm very interested in, namely video games and professional wrestling, and a little bit of nostalgia and flirting with the past to also relate to the topic of this conference. And I want to see how all these elements can be combined. So, first of all, for those of you who don't know about what professional wrestling is, it's a theatrical athletic spectacle. Probably you've seen some of these, and you can recognize some of these gentlemen in this picture. It's a spectacle in which people pretend to fight each other. Sorry to ruin it for you, it's all scripted, but the moves are very, very impactful. So there is some real contact, but it's all scripted, it's all predetermined. On that aside, let me first explain what the main topic of this presentation is. So the main topic is WWE 2K23, which is a video game licensed by WWE, the world's biggest professional wrestling company. It's a part of a yearly series, so before that there was WWE 2K22, next year probably will be 2K24, and it's a game of wrestling simulation. And what I want to specifically focus on, here you also see a screenshot, it looks very realistic, I think. It's that it has a mode called Create a Wrestler, CAW or COWS, as some people call them. And I want to see how people use these codes to challenge the official narratives set by the company itself. I say this because, yeah, this is also a picture of the Create a Wrestler mode, so you get an idea of how it works pretty much. So I say this because WWE, and this is a picture from the WWE archive, they are very serious about their archives, is a company that is very protective of its historical narrative. They often present something as a fact, or rewrite wrestling facts, despite fans knowing that it happened otherwise. For example, sometimes they change the size of a wrestler. They might present a particular wrestler as taller than they actually are, or they might tell something different than the world titles of a wrestler has won. For example, a wrestler might have won 20 world titles, but only recognize 16 of them. So they are very protective of their narrative, and they really try to make fans think that this is it as they say it. Now, a few more words about the Create a Wrestler mode. There are really big communities online only for these codes, these Create a Wrestler assets. And fans can now trade them. They can create them and upload them, and people can download them and trade them, or they can be used as status marking if a character is really well designed. And sometimes these characters are other wrestlers in other companies, or some characters from popular culture. So they are used for online trading and for online status marking. As I said, some of these characters, some of these wrestlers, these Create a Wrestler assets are wrestlers from other companies, or wrestlers that have been released, or controversial wrestlers, so people use them to rewrite wrestling history and also play what-if scenarios, and these are very popular online. And this is a screenshot from, I think the game is called WWF, back then, King of the Ring. This is the first time that the players got the opportunity to edit a character and change their speed, strength, and stamina. That character was called You, and later it progressed, it started becoming even more and more realistic in the games. And now we are at this phase. Now, why am I telling you all this? Why is it relevant? So, like to what Wigard and Troxell said about fighting video games and the stories carrying from game to game, we can say that in pro wrestling, stories also continue in various games. Someone might create a character and then carry that character to another game. It has also been noted that fans engage and shape the wrestling narrative by participating as audience members, cheering, booing, and giving their own take to what they see. But they do that, as I argue, on wrestling video games as well. That is because A, they create their own history, as I will explain in a moment, and B, I will also explain that, they sustain outdated games. Now, how does that happen? Let's go a little back and examine the concept of resistance and meaning making. In 1980, Michel de Certeau published this book, The Practice of Everyday Life, in which he distinguishes between strategies and tactics. He says that strategies include long-term planning and usually comes from those with authority, the producers, those in power, the companies. And then there are tactics that include short-term planning, they are spontaneous, and they come from the people. And he gives this example of walking in the city and then someone taking a shortcut, meaning that they engage in a tactic and they, in a way, resist the usual daily routine of taking a particular path and just taking a shortcut, which means that they give their own meaning to the way and, in a way, resisting and creating, engaging a tactic. And he also writes extensively about people reading books and creating their own meanings, understanding stories sometimes in a different way than what the author had intended. And this has been a foundation for fan studies and for the concept of fan fiction. So it's very important to understand that fans, in a way, resist and give their own meanings. And this all started by de Certeau's observations and later by Janis Radway's observations as well. Another interesting concept is the concept of gift economies, and first coined, many, many years ago, almost 100 years ago, by Marcel Mauss in the essay The Gift, in which he examines some relationships that are built on gift exchange. And also, fun studies scholars have noted that that fun cultures and fun communities function as a gift economy. So people create and upload and share stuff not for monetary income and exchange, but for the sake of the community. Now, the sample of my research, what I did was mainly qualitative research based on participant-based observation. I went on Reddit, on the WW2K23 and WW Games groups, and on YouTube, and that was on the period of March and April of 23. That was around the release of WW2K23. I know it's a bit late, but it was released in March. And I looked for these so-called codes and what the discourse was around those fan-made artifacts. So now let's see how fans make their own meanings, and later also how they sustain older games. I will also talk about that. First, I found that there is little discourse and little advice on how to make those codes, those created wrestlers, the formulas. There is more discourse on the characters themselves. So someone might create a character and people would discuss this particular character, or they might add requests. So instead of teaching the people how to make characters themselves, people just take requests or just talk about wrestlers that should have been included in the game, but they're not, so it's up to the fans to create them. And most of those codes that I found were forbidden wrestlers, within quotation marks, namely Chris Benoit, CM Punk, Sasha Banks. So these are wrestlers that the company, WWE, tries to erase and tries to avoid mentioning because they terminated their relationship with said company under very controversial conditions, or some wrestlers who just had their contract expired and they didn't renew and now work for a rival company, such as John Moxley, if you know him. In fact, I mentioned Chris Benoit earlier, and I have a separate slide about him because I would see a post about him at least once per week. He's one of the most controversial wrestlers of all time. I will not go into detail telling you what happened in 2007 with this person if you won't look it up, but it's some really, really heinous acts that he was involved in. And it's surprising to see that there are codes quite popular about him. As I said, I would see posts about him at least once per week. There are YouTube videos, how to make him and how to download him. There's like Reddit threads about him. So even though WWE has erased him from the books and never talk about him, fans constantly talk about him and they want to see him in the game. Maybe even more popular than Benoit or other forbidden wrestlers are wrestlers that appear in rival companies. So this is MJF, who's a wrestler in All Elite Wrestling, AEW, which is a rival company to WWE. So there's also big discourse about how to create and download and exchange and play with wrestlers that appear in companies that other than WWE and most likely will not appear for WWE in the foreseeable future. So a lot of what-if scenarios and a lot of WWE versus another company going on. An honorable mention here, although this relates to older games, is Ultimate Warrior. Some of you might have seen him. He was extremely popular in the 80s and 90s. He was blacklisted in WWE between around 1996 and 2013. So his memory lived through community creations. There were many videos and a lot of demand about the Ultimate Warrior in WWE games. And then in WWE 2014, he returned. But until then, he was blacklisted and his memory would only live through community creations. Another impressive sample that I found, again, it mainly relates to older games, but I found that fans are very eager to go back to older games if newer ones disappoint them. A notable example is WWE 2K19 or WWE 2K20, because when 2K20 was released, it was critically panned. There were some issues with its graphics, and sorry about what I'm going to say now. It was also super glitchy. So fans went back to older games, especially 2K19, and that made the game actually stay online. The official support stayed online for almost 3 years until 2K22 came out. And until that happened, fans would only play older versions and would only create codes and exchange them online on the older versions. On a side note, very interesting point I found I wanted to also mention is the point of exploitation, because it's fans creating content, creating pretty much marketing for the game, and sustaining the games and keeping them online. So someone might wonder if this constitutes free labor, and fans think otherwise. They do not see themselves as carrying out labor. What they see is that they offer back to the community, they are being heard, and they get exposure, and they want people to engage and play and all have a good time and just do it for the sake of the community, as I said earlier about gift economies. Some final thoughts is that professional wrestling companies, especially WWE, create and really care about their own canon narrative. Fans will be very eager to resist that, either in the stadium, giving their own thoughts on what is happening on the screen or in the arena, or in online communities. Professional wrestling video games then function both as a playground for people to create and share and have fun, but also as a battleground for memory construction and fans going against the official narrative of what the company wants to set as canon. Fans will resist that. They never forget what has actually happened, and they try always to give their own interpretation. And sometimes to do that, they resort to paratextual creativity, which is the created wrestlers in this case. And one last thing is that I believe we can understand a lot by examining these two forms of entertainment, especially situating them in a wider cultural and historical context. This is my list of references, and I thank you for your attention.